All right, I said I would talk a little bit more about quote leads. The one last thing I was going to say is besides all that is, the thing I wanted to say was just that you can probably say whatever you have in a quote better. Okay? You may see a great quote and think it's awesome, but you can probably do it better. You can probably say it in a few less words, with one or two words that make a little more sense, etc. And if nothing else, you should think you can do it better because you're the professional writer here. You're the professional communicator. You can, of course, do it better. Here's the thing about journalism, and something, to keep in mind. Journalists tend to be, have decent-sized egos. I was trying to think of how I would say this, but they tend to have decent-sized egos. I mean, you don't get into this business without being pretty sure and, being pretty confident, and that's a good thing. I mean, and so don't think that, you should be pretty confident in your own writing and your own ability to do things. And I understand right now, I mean, many of you are just learning, and you of course are here, but recognizing you want to get better and write better. But you should have a healthy self. You shouldn't be narcissistic, you shouldn't be self-inflated, but you should be confident enough to say, you know what, that's good, but I can probably do it better. And if, that's a good thing to have, is to have that sense. Because the same thing that leads you to say, I can probably do it better, also leads you to say, I don't think I did it better, and I need to do it better. Because that's what I do for a living. And so that's the one thing I would say about quote leads, is you can probably do it better. And if you don't think you can do it better, you need to be trying to do it better because, well, that's what you do for a living, and you should be able to do it better. Okay? So put in the effort and make it better. Now, with that said, I wanted to kind of just, as we're talking about leads were always one of my favorite things to do when I was reporting. I liked writing leads. I found them fun. So I was just going to give you, one time I put together, and this is years ago, I put together a sampling of some of my favorite leads, so I would put them out there when I would apply for jobs. I would put some of the leads I had that were the best. I'd tell them when they were published and what the story was about. But I just grabbed some of these. These are older, and I like them, and so I will just let you see them. Tri-County. This is up in the Peoria area, so Tri-County is Peoria County, Tazewell County, and Woodford County. And so those are sort of the three main areas that the Peoria paper covers. As while Tri-County residents may be feeling like they need to build an arc, that feeling may be more a matter of perception than precipitation. Maybe more a matter of perception than precipitation. A lot of people said to me after I wrote this one, they're like, that's really good. Perception than precipitation is just a fun wordplay. So it's a wordplay lead. I don't know, like I was sitting there and like the issue is that there'd been a lot of rain for like 2 weeks, but we'd had a really dry summer, and so everybody's kind of like, boy, it just seems like it's never going to stop raining. And so they said, why don't you do a weather story, which is always kind of one of those, like, great, I got to write a story about the weather. People typically don't like writing them, although weather stories oftentimes are very well read, because, if somebody's got a story about snow or how the snow impacted people, those are stories people tend to read, although as a reporter, they tend to be fairly routine, and it tends to be, it's not necessarily the most exciting thing. So they said, write a story about whether or not we're getting a lot of rain. Okay, like, I don't know what the heck I'm going to write about with this. And so I just came out and led with, basically what the Weather Service said is, it may seem really rainy lately, but we're on average for the month and for this time of year, but it's just been really dry, and so it's been raining more in the last couple weeks, but averaging out, it's all the same. And they said, averages are made by ups and downs. Sometimes it's dry, sometimes it's wet, but the average works its way out. So we are average. It just has been, day by day, there's been more rainy days in a row, but it's to take the whole month or the whole year, it's been on average. So it's more of a matter of perception than precipitation. So here's one. Area missions will get their daily bread today after almost a week without it. This one was about a group of food banks or other groups, and they would pick up day-old bread from a major grocery store chain in the area. And that chain, one of the regional managers said, well, we can't give out the bread anymore. Like, it was the baked bread, the fresh baked bread, and all the pastries and items from the deli. And they said, because if people got sick because we gave them old bread, we could get sued. Well, that's not really true. There's a Good Samaritan law that would protect them. But the other thing is that they were misunderstanding that. But it also, this was a big amount of bread they got, and so it was kind of a significant issue. So they called the newspaper and said, I don't know why they changed the policy, but we used to get a whole truckload of bread. We'd drive around to like 20, 30 stores and we'd get all this bread, and now we can't get any of it. So I called the corporate PR headquarters, made a couple calls, talked to a couple people, and within about 20, 30 minutes after I talked to them, they said, oh no, that was just a misunderstanding. That was never corporate policy. No, they of course immediately, were very apologetic because they realized there was going to be something in the paper about it. So instead of having a story about how they weren't giving the bread, I ended up getting a story about how they were going to return service. And so, I just played off that old, give us this day our daily bread. And I like that. It's kind of a nice word play. Then that's also a good story, a good example of how, as a reporter, just simply calling and asking some questions, sometimes the PR people who know what they're doing go, crap, we don't want this a bad story, and they realize, why in the world were they doing that, and they fix it quickly. And they basically cut the legs out from our story, but as reporters, and, there still was something that happened, and, we helped it out, so of course, we still wrote a story. So, and the PR people did a good job because it basically cut the legs out from under bad publicity, but it wasn't necessarily good publicity either. The next one, this is just a straight basic lead. The union that represents about 200 city workers voted to reject the city's final contract offer and instead voted to strike Friday. This was one that kind of was ongoing. I just like it. It's just a nice, quick lead. Nothing particularly exciting about it. It's just a nice, clear lead. This one I wrote. Actually, I was down. There was some discussion. They might vote. It was the clerical workers. I don't know why that's not in there, but that probably is just a matter of keeping it short. But people who did 911 dispatch and things like that, and they were voting to possibly strike. They were having some union contract issues, and I went down to the union meeting, and they wouldn't let me in, of course, which is not unusual. But I talked to people as they were leaving. They told me they voted to strike. They gave me the information. The union leader came out and he confirmed everything, but he didn't want to be on the record, so he kind of gave it to me on background, and kind of he listened to what I said and corrected me if I was wrong. But he basically, it was kind of, I'll talk about that later. But I called down on my cell phone and told the newsroom what had happened. They said, this might be front page worthy, but the copy desk didn't want to rewrite or redo the front page once they had it locked in. And so they weren't going to run it in the first edition of the paper that went out like to the counties around, and they were just going to use it for the city edition. But they thought this might be worth the front page, but if they were going to do it for the front page, they were going to do it for all editions. So they needed it right away. And they said, you got like 30 minutes to get this story, or like an hour to get this story. So I had to wait for this guy, got done, got in my car, drove as fast as I could back to the newsroom, and got there and just pounded out this story as quick as I could, and got it there within like 40 minutes, and maybe even less, and ended up doing, was pretty impressed with how well it worked. And that's just a case where, you got to do it, you got to do it quick, and all your training kind of works to make that happen. But it was one of these where, I was just flying back trying to get this, because I knew I had, like, by the time I got back, I had like 25 or 30 minutes to organize and write, which is not a lot of time. Kevin Test still doesn't have the answers to his questions about his son's apparent suicide during the pre-dawn hours on the day after Christmas. Yeah, I did not read that very well. Kevin Test still doesn't have the answers to his questions about his son's apparent suicide during the pre-dawn hours on the day after Christmas. So this is sort of leading with somebody else. It's perhaps an anecdotal. It's also a bit of a scene setter, a little bit of both. But basically, the reason I like this is, this word like pre-dawn hours really kind of sets this mood, this kind of darkness, this other thing. You read the word Christmas in, even though it's December 26th. And so that was all kind of a nice story pulled together. What actually the story was about was this kid committed suicide. He was in prison, and he committed suicide the day after Christmas, and the family was sort of thinking that it seemed kind of suspect that his son got killed, would kill himself in prison, because he was supposed to be released like 60 days after that. He wasn't. He'd been in there like 2 years, and he was about to get released, and for whatever reason he killed himself, and they were really kind of upset. People talked to him, and I think maybe he had a little bit of run-in with somebody else, and so there was some question, and maybe there was foul play, and how come the guards weren't keeping better track. They were upset, but I just think that some of the wording helps capture it and kind of brings you into the story. I don't ever know if anything ever came out of it. Last week, 16,000 ducks flew into Peoria to hit the Illinois River, a place they haven't swum in 10 years. Okay, this is a little bit of a blind lead. What are they talking about? 16,000 ducks flying into Peoria to hit the Illinois River, a place they haven't swum in 10 years? Like, what are you talking about? Well, it was talking about, a duck derby, one of those little races where they put the ducks in the water, and if your number crosses the finish line first, you get the prize. Well, that's what this was. And so, basically, the 16,000 ducks flew into Peoria. There's actually organizations that own a lot of these ducks, and they actually transport or ship them around from charity event to charity event. And when they get there, a group has to take all the old information off of them and place new identifying stickers or names or whatever on them, and then clean them, make sure they're ready, and they take them out, they throw them in, and then they have to collect them up and reprocess them back into their shipping containers and send them on to the next town. And so that's what the story was about. And so that was just a fun way. It was probably what would be an example of a blind lead. Maybe also a little bit, it's a blind lead, I would say. And then here's a scene setter. The Civic Center rolled out the carpet, as well as the linoleum, tile, and hardwood flooring this weekend. And this is about a home show that was going on, and all these people brought out things like carpet, linoleum, tile for people looking to do home repairs and home remodeling. They had all of it on display, and so they rolled out the carpet as well as the linoleum, tile, and hardwood flooring this weekend. And I remember this one editor who was kind of a little bit of a jerk. Well, a little bit might be an underestimate. He yelled across the newsroom. He said, "Hey, Mackenzie," and I said, "Yeah," and he said, "That lead of yours is not too effed up." He didn't say effed, he used the actual word. But he said, "That's not too effed up," and I was like, okay, like that's interesting. And one of the other editors who was sitting next to me, he goes, "That's high praise coming from him. That's the best compliment you'll ever get out of him." And so, that was sort of, I thought it worked well, and kind of a little bit of a scene setter, I suppose. Is that the last? Oh, here's the last one. This was just a feature story, probably a pretty boring story. It said, visitors to the Glen Oaks Zoo were guests Saturday for a boa constrictor's dinner, a meal that's served only every 10 days. Just a scene setter, nothing particularly exciting. Can't really even tell you all that much about the story. I think it was just about going to the zoo and doing a story about, I think there was a snake event, and they were people were going to get to witness the feeding of the boa constrictor. And that was what I did the story on, about people going to watch the boa constrictor eat a mouse, or a rat, or whatever it was eating. A small cat, I don't know. Can't remember now. Maybe it was a man, I don't know. Anyway, and so that was basically all it was. And so just, grabbing the attention, quick information. And so those are just a few examples. You can categorize them, but I thought I would just share those. And so hope you'll think about it and think about how you grab attention and write things nicely, clearly, and grab people's attention and bring them into your story and make them want to read what you wrote.